Okay, this is Jack Baldwin with Reynard Custom Homes, and I'm joined by James Knight. James, how are you?
Good, Jack. Nice to be here. Nice to see you again.
Yes, thanks for hosting our webinar. We're going to be talking about how to get a building permit for a custom home project, and we got some people joining us today. We'll have some folks lingering in as we talk, so we will be setting aside a Q&A time towards the end. So anybody who's joined, if you're on about 15 minutes towards the hour, we'll do a quick Q&A. You can ask as many questions as you want. That's what we're here for. So thanks again for joining us. James, just to get started, we're going to jump right into the building permit process. So I guess the most basic question, just to kind of set the table, what is a building permit? Why do we need it for a custom home project?
Well, a building permit is basically permission from either your city or your county to build what you say you're going to build on your site, right? It can be a complicated process in some locations. It can be quite a straightforward process in other locations. And the items that you need to submit for this permit vary widely, just depending on who you're talking to in the county or the city, or what you're trying to achieve. Because as a custom home, like when you're building a custom home, there's a lot of different things that go into it, right? So some things are just more complex and will trigger certain things from the county or the city to require, like stormwater management or engineering. Where other things, if you're just doing something more simple, maybe it's a small little ADU and things like that, it's a little bit easier to get through. So essentially, it is custom, like your custom home is, but it is just permission to build what you say you're going to build on the site.
Yeah, and you mentioned some places are more complicated than others. So I want to touch on that real quick. What would complicate a building permit process?
Oh, there's a ton of different things.
Yeah, it's a pretty big question, I realize.
Really, yeah, I'll try and cover as much as I can, and maybe we can get the questions later on that might trigger even more answers. But in a nutshell, when we're looking at a building permit or moving towards a building permit, your more complicated cases will include things like, having septic or water connections already on site, your electricity, whether that's set up or not. It'll be, do you actually have an address yet on your site? Because not every site, when you're buying land, a lot of the times it's a developer, they're buying a big patch of land and they're separating it out. You don't always have an address associated with that land yet. So this is something that they'll look at as well. And these are all separate from the actual custom home. So we're not even at those drawings yet, right? So all these sorts of things. And they might not come in this order, and that's what complicates things. Some things will be at the end of a project where you're doing your building permit, and some things they will want to see being completed before you apply for your building permit. So, like I was saying, custom, right? It comes in custom home, custom building permit. Other things that we'll be looking at as well are things like your landscaping. So once we get over a certain size of home, we're looking at stormwater management plans. So this can be triggered in certain counties by lot coverage. And typically it's about 5,000 square feet of lot coverage. So that is the house footprint. That's the driveways, that's the footpaths, that's your pool, all that sort of thing. Because there's so much concrete, so much area not letting the rainfall hit the earth, they will require you to submit a plan saying how are you going to manage the rainfall? Where's the water going to go? Is it going to go directly into your neighbors? Are you going to trap it on your own site? All these sorts of things. So that's one thing to consider. So your landscaping is a huge thing, right? Then you have your engineering, and that goes hand in hand with your architectural drawings. So they will want to see, in a lot of cases, they will want to see, especially when it's a more complicated build, structural engineering when it comes to the concrete slab. How are you going to build out that basement? Are you going to use CMU walls? Are you going to use concrete walls? Are you going to use trusses for your floor framing? Or are you going to stick build the whole thing? So they'll look at that in case of engineering. So they want to see an engineering stamp over a lot of the drawings. And then they'll want to see a full set of plans Now, these can be architectural or they can just be building design plans. Again, it'll depend on where you're coming from, what county you're in, what city you're in. The more stringent cities that we deal with, they want to see full sets of plans, a lot of detail. So they'll be backed up by engineering at the same time. So there's a lot of things there as well. Then once we get through all the drawings, some other things to consider, your financing. How are you actually going to build the building? Do we need to talk about financing? Do you need to find a loaner that will, some sort of home loan, some sort of construction loan, some sort of renovation loan? There's a lot of different financing options out there, but a lot of times we see this coming more and more these days where building permits may actually hinge on whether or not you have financing to line up with it as well. So it's worth just thinking of the most complicated case and then reverse engineering it and being like, okay, I may need all these things, and then being like, okay, now let's break it down. Where's it going to be? All right, it's Union County, or it's Gilmer, or it's, it's wherever you are. Let's talk to them. Let's get the team involved. Let's talk to them, find out what's actually involved in this permit, and then reverse engineering it back to your custom build. So yeah, a lot of different things that go into it, and that doesn't cover everything, but that's a few of the things that we run into all the time.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of what I was wondering too, is like, how do you find out if it's city versus county? How do you find out if there's a historical preservation society or community? How do you find out if there are covenants or an HOA? Because all of those, an HOA may not be giving you your building permit, but they're certainly not going to allow you to build if you are not abiding by the covenants or the HOA. So what's a good first step for somebody who's like, I don't even know what the county or the city or who, how do I find out what's going to be required of me?
So there's a few ways to approach this. It's first having a good real estate agent when you're buying land or buying an existing property, right? And finding what neighborhood you're going to be in. So finding out if you are in an HOA neighborhood, because yes, they cannot, they don't know the building laws and regulations, right? So they're not going to be submitting or giving you a building permit per se. But a building permit will be hinging on whether or not your HOA said yes to what you want to build, right? So you have to get the approval from the HOA first before you can get a building permit. If you were to go around it and then get the building permit and start building, the HOAs have the power to stop you and fine you, right? Just like the local city or the local county can do, is stop and fine you as well. When it comes to historical preservation, that is more on the county or city level. It's typically on a city level, I believe, as things, more historical sort of things are set up in that sort of town structure. So the way you find out about that is you just go to your local city and you just talk to them and you find out. They will have maps. They will have specific buildings within your area. If it's a single building or if it's a whole area, they will be able to direct you on it. It's something that you should do before you purchase the land or the property that you want to develop, right? Unless you have in your mind that, yes, I know I want to develop something in a historical area, and then you seek it out, but then you would already know what the historical areas are. So you don't want to be caught out unaware and find out that you already have a property that's historical, and then you have to deal with the hurdles that go with that, because that is separate from a building permit as well. And just like an HOA, you will have to submit your drawings and your set and your engineering, all that sort of thing, to the Historical Preservation Committee, and then they will have to approve it before you can get a building permit to go with it as well.
Yeah, so it's good to just check those boxes before you get too far along. A lot of times, if you're in a rural area, you're not going to encounter a city or HPC, or sometimes you might avoid a covenants or restrictions or an HOA altogether if you're looking at more rural areas. And also the permit process is a little different from place to place too. But what do we advise? Like, if you want to have the highest likelihood of getting a building permit, what should you be prepared for? What should you have in hand Is it just floor plans and elevations? Is it, which documents are going to give a homeowner the most likely result of an approved building permit?
Yeah, so it's kind of, once you do your research, and we gear our projects towards starting the project off by just doing research, right? So talking to the county and finding out what are they going to require, what is their specific process. You'll find that county to county, all the different processes are going to be different. You're going to talk to different people. They may even use different residential codes. One might use, 2018 residential codes versus 2016, or some amendment that isn't used in one county or the next. So a research phase is really important. You can just talk to them. They'll give you all the information. If they don't, then there's an issue somewhere else you need to deal with, right? So once you talk to them, they will tell you, hey, we only need a site plan. And we've dealt with projects in the past that was just a site plan and a floor plan. They didn't need engineering. They didn't need elevations and things like that. That's pretty rare these days because the counties and cities are getting a lot stricter than they used to be because so many people are building, right? And they're releasing more land. And there's a lot of things that go with it. So these days, when we're approaching a project, we really want a full set of drawings just for the permit, and that being a full set of architectural. So you're gonna have a cover sheet that's going to say what residential building codes are you using, like the year, and then it'll list them, right? Then you're going to have your floor plans, your site plan, building sections, everything that will dictate how the building will go together, show your materials on the exterior of the building, and then you'll be backed up by engineering as well. So your foundation plans, your framing plans, your roofing plans, all that sort of thing. At a very minimum, that's what you need, in my opinion, to have a really solid set of drawings to get a building permit. Now, that's separate from what I would recommend the homeowner have for their builder to actually build the home. So that's a different conversation. So there's a building permit, and then there's actually what the builder needs to build the custom home. And the more custom you want to go with it, and the more higher end, then the more drawings that are going to go into it. And the county doesn't particularly need all those drawings. They don't need to see your interior design, right? But you want it and you need it. It should be something that you want and need. They might not need the landscaping plans where you're going to put all the landscaping, but the HOA might need it, right? So building permits are different from other submissions that you do. So they might require, when we're talking about landscaping, they might require a set of stormwater management plans, but they don't particularly care where the plants are. So that's different from like a landscaping plan versus stormwater management plan, right? So there's two different ones. So the HOA might require landscaping and the county might require management. So when you're designing a project, look at it like what will you require and what will your builder require versus what is the minimum that the building permit will require. Because it's better to think long term and submit everything over the top. Just go over the top with it, and get really what you want to build and then reverse engineer it to what the building permit needs. Because if you do that, then you're not going to have any issues. Then the county goes, hey, these guys know what they're talking about. They know what they want to build. It's quite clear. They've gone well above and beyond to build it. So they're not going to question you at that point.
Well, that kind of touches on a few things that I've been thinking about too. Like what does it take to get a building permit done? If we're just looking at the bare minimum to get it done, it still sounds like it can put the client, the builder, the design team, can still put them in a place of liability. And what we're trying to avoid is increased liability, but we're also trying to avoid a home that's not well built. So why do we even have a permit set or a permit requirement to begin with? Is it just to make people jump through hoops, or is it because the county, city, whomever wants a well-built home in place and they want the people that are living in those homes to live in a safe place? And so we try to take that same philosophical approach. But James, what could go wrong? Like, what are some common pitfalls or common mistakes, I guess? Try and phrase the question around understanding, like, what could go wrong on a project that could prevent me from getting a building permit, or what are some things I should definitely be thinking about when I'm just building my custom home and I want a successful project when it comes to the permit set.
Sure. Like,
Like,
so there'll be certain things that will make your building achievable on a building permit sort of level, and then there'll be other things when it comes to actually like getting the house built, whether or not it's feasible or not, like financing and stuff like that. Obviously, the building permit doesn't care so much about if you can afford it versus they want to make sure that you're adhering to the residential codes for construction, right? And everything that goes along with that, like engineering and landscaping and stuff. Things that could go wrong is not doing your research in advance, being in a flood zone and not knowing about it, and then designing a house that you didn't realize, needed to be 2 foot above all the surrounding land. And you come back and that seems like an easy change, but your landscaper comes back and your earth moving guys come back and they're like, well, that's going to cost you an extra 60K. And now you can't afford the building, right? Because you budgeted everything down to the exactly where you need it to be. So that's something that could come back. So making sure that you talk to the county and be like, all right, so what things do I need to look at? Am I in a flood zone? Yes or no? Sort of thing. Like, how close am I to the river? How low is it? Sort of thing. So if you were doing something down in like Florida or Savannah or something like that, Savannah is like the whole town is basically in a flood zone. So you need to consider that. The other thing to consider is like, removal of trees on site. If you're in an area or part of the county or like city of Atlanta, that city of Atlanta has very strict tree rules, what you can and can't remove, right? So it's worth talking to them. They have a arborist team in place that talks to clients about what they expect with the landscaping plans. So if you were to design in the city of Atlanta, you would need a landscaper on board the project, no matter what. It's not your choice. They will have to submit a landscaping plan that will show you the trees, where they're going to be, the existing trees on site, and they will talk about new trees that you need to plant. You will have to plant trees in your front yard, things like that. So these are some of the things that have come back on different projects, different people we've spoken to, things they've had to deal with, right? So vegetation, where the site is, what's going into the site, getting a soil test. What is the house actually going to sit on? Not getting this prepared before time can have huge cost implications, right? So if it's just going to be a concrete slab that's going down, if it's sitting on the wrong type of soil, we've seen this in the past, not determining what the soil is, and if it's compactable and stuff like that, could result in you having to put down piers or something along those lines to make sure that it holds up that slab. So, and that may be the difference between doing a crawl space, basement, just a slab, a typical slab, all sorts of different things. Maybe it's on columns, maybe it's on piers, lots of different things there. So doing research is the biggest thing I would recommend early on to make sure, this is where the house is going to be, this is what's on that site, in the ground, those sorts of things. So a lot of these things kind of have like implications when it comes to cost. But if there's like setbacks from rivers, setbacks from, power lines, maybe you have some power lines going through your site and stuff like that, and it restricts where you can build, the slope of the site, things like that. These are all things that you should research before time and can kind of stop you from building in the future or make it extremely expensive, even if it is a simple design.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I want to get to some questions in just a minute, but I have one more question for you before we do that, James. Tell me a little bit about, as far as a building permit goes, when we go to submit the actual application, who should be doing that? Would it be the architect? Is it the homeowner themselves? Like, who's actually producing the application and getting the building permit themselves in hand?
So as a design team, we can't submit it for you. We can help you gather information. We can obviously help, with the architectural, the interior drawings, landscaping drawings, the structural drawings. We can help coordinate all those things. But we can't physically submit the drawings to the county for permit. So that either has to come from the homeowner or client themselves or from your chosen builder. I would recommend, if you are not being your own GC, obviously having your builder submit it for you, because they take on the liability at that point. They'll have a contract license, like a building license that will go with it. They'll have a level of insurance that goes with it as well. So if you use your builder to submit those plans. Now they will require things from you, like, signatures and all that sort of stuff, and financing, and they'll work with you to get those sorts of things. But they'll be the ones who submit it. We can't physically submit it. You can also submit it yourself. Especially I see today we have a couple of clients on here who will be their own GC, so they'll be submitting it themselves, right? So again, there'll be research that they'll have to do with the county or the city, and just what do they need to have to be able to submit. So they may need to get their own insurance for the build permit, right? So if you were to do it in different counties and different cities, these will be different requirements, right? Even different countries. Like for me, I'm in Australia at the moment. I would have to get public liability insurance, construction insurance, a series of different types of insurance to make sure that the builders and people on the site are protected. Also, anyone who visits the site are protected, and anything that may happen on the site and then affect the neighbors are protected. So a series of different insurances that they'll have to get as well, and the county may or may not need this. So a little bit of research again goes a long way.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing too is, even if the county, I think it's important to point out that whether the county requires a minimum level of documentation to get the home built or not, we, our interest is in seeing a well-built home. So we really want to be over-prepared as much as possible, not for the sake of overdoing it.
If you think of it in terms of like, here's what the county requires for the building permit, but more importantly, how are you going to protect yourself?
Yeah.
Right? Because you want the building to be built in a very specific way. You don't want to just do what the building permit or the county requires you to do, because that's not going to be enough. And if you really want to be thoughtful in your choices and protect yourself, you will want to, have a full set of structural engineering drawings to go with it. Make sure it actually holds up, because as a designer, I can't specify the size of beams that go into a house, right? Or the size of a particular column or something like that. Like if it's going to be steel construction, I can say, hey, it's going to be steel, but the engineer is the one who's saying it needs to be this type of steel, it needs to be an I-joist, or it needs to be cold rolled steel, or whatever it is. I can only say it's going to be steel. They're the ones who are going to say, hey, here's how that steel works. Here's the loads that will be applied to that, structural member. So when it comes to structural engineering, that's really important. That's why we try and push people towards it. When it comes to insurance, that's another thing. You want to protect yourself in case something happens. So you want to get those sorts of things and make sure your builder has those sorts of things. And if they don't, you have to question why. Right? That may be why they're so cheap. If they are coming out like $150 a square foot, and be like, why are they cheaper? Why are they $100 cheaper than everyone else per square foot? Right? So just researching again on these sorts of things, but protecting yourself, because it's not just about the building permit or the HOA. It's about you at the end of the day, making sure you get what you want.
Yeah. And the building permit conversation is really just a context for what goes into that part of the application process, but it does touch on the bigger questions, like what do I actually need to get the home built? And so there's a permitting, and it's different from place to place. But I guess I wanted to get the more nuanced answer, because we do have people who work with us all the time that are all over the state. They're in different counties, they're in different cities, and they're going to have different requirements. But we would say best practices is probably the best way of putting it. Be prepared for a stormwater management plan. Be prepared for a soil and perk test. Be prepared for a septic permit, for a site plan. Make sure you actually have a survey with topography, so that you can get a good site plan. Making sure your architectural set has a cover sheet on it, that it has building sections, window and door schedules, that it's an actual full construction set, not just a set of floor plans, because you can download stuff online. You can buy floor plans in a lot of different places. But let's touch on that for a second before we move into questions, James. if somebody did have a set of plans online, and this may be an obvious answer we already touched on, but walk me through that one more time. Like, why would we recommend somebody not just take a set of plans and submit them to the building permit office?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I always recommend people do get a set of plans just as a precedent of the example of what they want to achieve. But just submitting those standalone, and you might have elevations that go with them and a couple of renders that go with them, like on a site. It doesn't cover enough questions, right, for your builder. Even if it does cover the questions that the county might have, it's not going to answer the question of the site plan and stuff like that, because that's going to be site specific to you. But really, in my mind, they're only a starting point. And even if you were to purchase those plans from those websites and stuff like that, you would likely be going back to where you bought those plans for changes and for amendments and adding a site plan in and like specific elevations and stuff like that, because they are customizable plans. So they're good just to get the point across, but they don't cover enough detail, especially when a builder comes on board. Unless that builder is providing you with those plans to start with, and they have a certain agenda already built into those plans, and they know what they're trying to build when they show them to you. But any other builder that hasn't seen them before, any other design team that haven't seen them before, they're going to have questions about, like, well, what does this mean? Like, is that enough space for you there? Like, what type of windows are in this? Like, so many questions that you can't answer, right?
Yeah. Well, James, thanks. I thought that was really good conversation, just to kind of get out ahead of some questions I think people have when they're looking at the permitting process. And again, it's not just the permit; it's everything that goes into a construction set for a successful build. That's where we're hoping to touch on today. But with that being said, I'd like to spend about 15 minutes. If we go a little over, that's fine. But we've got some guests here who might have questions. So if you'd like to ask a question to myself or James, you can raise your hand. I'll call on you. You can type it in the chat window, or if you just want to unmute yourself and ask a question, we are good with that. But I'll give us a second or two, and if we don't have any questions, we can start to wrap up. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. June, Vicky, hi.
Hi. That's very helpful, James. All the stuff, very helpful, because now we've passed those processes. We've done the erosion control, we've done the septic, we've done the most of the things that you spoke about. But we were, we were lucky because we didn't have a lot of problems. We did have some challenges, but we were able to overcome them. I guess we had a good team. I think everybody contributed to helping us, with overcome all those things. But I'm glad we were not in a flood site or whatever.
Flood zone.
Yeah, I mean,
Flood zone.
you guys did have a setback from like the little creek or the little river that runs through.
Yeah.
Your site.
Yeah, and so
That's okay.
yeah, so we actually got our permit to disturb the land, so we can actually go ahead with it. But I need to get my ducks in a row with all the contracts, because once that's done, I need the next phase to happen, and I don't want to do it before getting all my bids done. I think I have half of them already. So maybe another couple of weeks, I'm going to submit them to the bank. And I think the bank will take about a month or so to get that done. So,
yeah, there's a lot.
Well, Vicky, yeah, there's been a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we've waited a long time. It's getting the permit process for the erosion control plan took a long time, and they just gave us a hard time.
Yeah.
So once we get our grading completed, once that's implemented, that's when we get the building permit. But I know we still have to make our research, but they also haven't told us what it entails to get a building permit.
Yeah.
It sounded to us like we'll just give you one, but I don't think that's the
Yeah,
case.
that's how they sound like, and then you just get a building permit, like it's no big deal, but I know it's going to entail more than more than that. Yeah,
You're in
and
Cherokee County. I don't think you're in the city, and you guys don't have an HOA, right?
no HOA. I mean, that was one thing that we made sure we didn't have any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Cherokee County's gonna be. You'll be in a good spot for
Yeah.
getting your permit. Yeah.
Oh,
Great.
okay. Yeah, our neighbor didn't have a hard time. I think he got it. He submitted it, and then he got it. I don't know if maybe in a week. So it's just a matter of getting every requirement met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
for the
you
ben-
guys-
for
so
the
you
benefit
do-
of, I'm sorry, James. Go ahead.
I was just going to clarify with them. So you guys got the permit to clear the land first, right, and then to make access onto the site, and that's what you've started now.
Yes.
But that's separate from obviously the building permit. But you've also
Right.
before that, I mean, we played around for a long time with the septic and the
Yeah.
stormwater management or the erosion control, depending on
Yeah.
where you are, it changes its
Yeah.
name. So these are all sorts of things when you're doing, especially when you're your own GC, you have to organize these things separately, right? So
Yeah.
so many different things lining up. So it's interesting for the other people on the call what you've gone through, because you've done the septic, you've done the erosion control that kind of went hand in hand with the septic, which dictated where the placement of the house was, and we're still having
Yeah.
conversations about the placement. I know that.
Mhm.
And that's not, and you don't even have the building permit yet, but those things like clearing the land and stuff like that, you can get done at a certain point before the building permit. And you also would have probably had to deal with the fact of like, you can't disturb the land before you get the septic permit done and all that, the testing and
Right.
stuff
Yeah.
like that. Those sorts of things. So
No,
there's
we
a-
have leach. Yeah.
Yeah.
The leach fields have been installed, and so we're good with that. Hold on.
Yeah, the drain, they've already done the drain. It's all good. They have the pipes in and everything. So, which is what they wanted us to do first, because there's not a lot of room to get everything done in there. So they
Mhm.
want to make sure that that's in place before we can proceed to the next phase.
Yeah, correct. And this just to bring this into a wider context with other projects as well. This is why you do your research, because for 50 in June, that was the process, right? They do everything before they get the building permit. There's other places you have to just check what county you're in. Just call them up, go in there and visit them in person. You can do that too, and just talk to them. Be like, can I do my septic beforehand? Can I put them in the tank and all the lines? Do I do the land clearing first, or do you want us to wait and do it all with the building permit? Because different places are have different processes. And if there's a building on site, like when can you demolish it? I know you guys didn't have a building on site to demolish, which is great, but other sites do, and that's something that you can consider as well. Like, when do I go in and demolish it? I know we have another project right now where they won't let them totally demolish it and then move the house around on the side. It's a demolish, and then they have to build on the footprint that was there originally, with the same type of construction. So it's a crawl space, right? So, but they didn't know that until they did the research. Again, like talking to the county, and then so
I'm so glad I don't have that problem.
yeah. Well, if you get lucky and the house was where you wanted it to be and the foundation's already done, then you can try and utilize the foundation. So pros and cons.
I'm feeling lucky with all the even though it was a long time, it took a long time. I feel lucky that we didn't have more problems than we were anticipating, because I was really worried about that land. I didn't know whether we can build. That's why I didn't do anything for the longest time, because I didn't want to set my hopes up, and I didn't want to spend all that money and then have nothing at the end of it. So now that everything is a go, now we're like, oh my gosh, everything is right there in front of us. I gotta get the bids. I gotta compare the bids. I gotta review each line item to make sure that, and how do I get the resources to actually have that discernment that do I have everything?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
Vicky, Yeah, go ahead, June. Sorry.
What we didn't do in the beginning, as James has suggested, was to research the land before purchasing it. That's what we didn't do.
Well, I didn't do that because I thought that there was not a lot of land for sale, and this was a good location. It didn't have any HOA, and it was near the highway. There were buildings already. It's a mature subdivision.
Mhm.
I was worried about the land, but I did consult with a builder, and they said, "Yeah, you can build here, except that you're gonna put money trying to improve it." And so we are right now. I got an estimate from one of the guys that we've contacted. It's like it's gonna take $40,000 to actually get that land ready for building because we're going down. Yeah. So I don't know if
It's
that's
because of the slope.
I don't know if that's a good cost or not, but
We're in
Yeah,
it
especially
already.
on your side because we have it is on a slope side, and this is kind of an interesting side that they have. But it's sloped, but there also is considerations for the drainage that runs through like stormwater drainage that runs through the site because we have the creek at the bottom and all the stormwater comes through your site, right? So you need to do a lot of prep to make sure you do it correctly. So you can put different bids out for earth moving and things like that, but I would imagine that's pretty on point with make sure you get it correct.
so that price is fine.
Yeah, well, yeah, I can't comment on really like different quotes that come in for you because they're going to be different.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm waiting for another. I think I'm waiting for another quote.
Another bid. Yeah.
Yeah, another bid for that. But I've met the guys. We've met with a lot of the contractors, and they seem nice, but that doesn't really mean anything.
At the end of the day, they need to be able to get the work done. That's important.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's
nice. Yeah.
that's the
Did y'all-
big thing that that my in the back of my head. Do I need to get 3 bids when I know that my neighbor used them and he swears by them because he's known them a long time? Or do I get bids from strangers that I don't know and I don't know how much they work with contractors that they may like treat me like I'm no one, I'm nobody, and just keep saying, "Oh, I will do it tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow," and tomorrow never ends. But with these guys, they are pretty much well connected, and so and it's so hard to get bids.
You've already got a good reference for them. It's the same thing
Yeah.
with any of the others, right? You look up their references, you make sure that they're not just like a handshake sort of deal. It's like it's actually written in the contract and signed upon, so they're going to do the work. You call their references, make sure they're going to do the work. They've done it in the past. They're not going to screw anyone over. So as long as you get those things and they're responsive. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Well, Vicky, June, we'll probably have to interview you guys once the home is completely built, so you can tell your story. But I think and I'm not kidding. We'll probably do that so we can learn from it too and teach other people because I think everybody listening now they're learning some things too, just as we all are about the process. Logan or Rod, do y'all want to chime in? Do y'all have any questions before we wrap up?
Yeah, it sounds like. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks,
It sounds
Rod.
like they are June and Vicky. They are what's called owner GCs. What's the recommendation for someone who want to tackle that whole weather hat of owner GC?
Would y'all say don't do it?
I say give it a try. I mean,
It sounds like you should do more due diligence before you close the lot. Is that because that's where I am. I have a lot. I'm under contract, and I'm just working on what things to look at.
Rod, what I say to that too, what we recommend a lot of our clients do, and we weren't doing this when we first started with June and Vicky, but we started including a general contractor earlier in the process. Whether you build with that person or not doesn't matter. Logan, who is also on with us, they did the same thing. They hired a general contractor as a consultant.
Okay.
And so one of the things we would recommend is having a GC involved as early as possible. For our design team, we include a GC as an option so that we can help with that land prep,
Okay.
asking those questions.
Mhm.
So we want to do what's called like a site feasibility study,
There you go.
and mostly we want to find out which surveys do we need, and then answer some of those questions like we were putting out there to start with. Is this in the city limits? Is it county? Is there going to be a nosy neighbor? Are we going to have a waterfall issue or water flow issue? Are we going to have a really, really long driveway to pave? Like, there's a lot of things we need to think about before we start construction.
Okay.
Vicky and June kind of did that the hard way, unfortunately. But they've also learned a lot, which is very valuable to us and to them. But one of the things I'm getting at is, as a design build team that we're doing at Reynard, we really like that approach of being able to slow down, take a really good hard look at the property, and make sure you know what your site prep costs are going to be going into it. And also think about the orientation. Like, how do you want the house to set? Where is your ideal place? How do you want to use the land? All of those questions we can start answering early.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
So, with that in mind, I would definitely go the way that they suggest. Yes,
All right.
I would recommend that.
Okay.
Logan,
My thing was that I did not have the time to
yeah.
kind of like, this land is on for sale, right?
Yeah.
The two right next to it, they sold within 2 days.
Yeah, they did get a really nice piece of property, and fortunately it's been
So-
working out.
So that's the thing that if when you have a lot like the perk test and the just the surveyor, I guess, it takes time. And
Yeah.
they had, when we were doing it, they had a lot of backlog. Literally,
Yeah.
like they had a lot of things to do. But we bought the land, and
Rest is
Yeah,
Yes.
then was right in the
wouldn't do
midst
that
of COVID. They were everywhere.
Okay.
Logan, it looks like you were wanting to chime in. I didn't want to talk over you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you were mentioning there's a couple different things when it comes to being your own GC. It's a lot of work. I mean, I have Keith who's helping me. Keith Kalish. I don't know if you listened the other time they had Jack had him on to do his piece there. But he's got howtobuildyourownhome.com. He's got some really good stuff. And I paid him quite a bit of money to walk me through it because I have my own full-time job. But even with that, it's a good amount of work. It's not impossible. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily hard. It's just
Time consuming.
you gotta make time for it, and you gotta start early when it comes to being your own GC.
Yeah. Those are good points.
And then the other thing I'd say, if you're still under contract, is I know someone mentioned a perk test. That's important for percolation if you're going to be on a septic. Then if the other thing I'd recommend, and Keith talks about this some as well, is getting an actual soils test. And this is different than a perk test. Lots of times people get them confused. The perk test is done by a soil scientist, but the soils test is done by an engineer. And what he does is they dig test pits on the spot where you think you're going to put the home on the lot. And what they end up doing is they look at the soil at the level at which you're going to put the foundation, and they'll tell you if it's compactable soil or expandable soil, or because if you get some really expandable soil, I think James mentioned this a little bit earlier, then you got to get piers, and just you can avoid a lot of hassle by doing that ahead of time. And especially if you're under contract, you can ask the seller to pay for it for you. And you tell him that, hey, you can write it in the contract. You can say, hey, if you do this, I will compensate you for it in the event that it all checks out.
Okay.
Now, what ends up happening is if you get that soil test and it doesn't check out after you've already bought it, well, now you own the land on something you can't build with. And that's something I wish I had done ahead of time. I had a perk test done, so I know that my septic would pass, but I haven't done a soils test yet. Now, I took a little bit of a risk because I've seen other homes being built in my HOA. So I'm saying, okay, well, this is a relatively new subdivision, so it's not the last lot in the subdivision. So I know that it's not something that's, the ugly duckling or anything, but it's also, has enough of a background to be able to say, okay, there's been other homes here. I'm just going to take a gamble, and we'll look at it in a little bit. So those are some of my recommendations. I have a soil test. Go dig down, see if you can get the seller to pay for it, and say, hey, in the event that it checks out and we're under contract. Or even put up some due diligence money to say, hey, if this checks out,
Yeah,
you
that's
do
a
it
good
that way.
point, Logan.
All right.
Yeah, especially while you're under contract and you got some negotiating power.
Yeah.
That's a great time to make some asks, especially if you got a motivated seller. But yeah, Logan and his wife Elise are designing with us. They're almost halfway through. I guess they're getting there. June and Vicky, I know you guys have a lot going on. June and Vicky are on the home stretch. And Rod, you and I spoke real briefly this afternoon about a home that you'd like to design. But in a nutshell, Rod, what we're helping June, Vicky, but also Logan and Elise with is we're just committed to getting their homes built. That's our role. In some cases, we have people who have a contractor or a builder that they bring with them. In some cases, we bring a builder, introduce them. In some cases, we go help them find a builder. But we're a consulting and design and project management team. We can include landscape design. That's an option for some of our clients if they want to include that as part of the design. But our job is to make sure that everything is specified for the home. So you've got all the interiors, all the exteriors, everything it's going to take to build this home. We're providing you the instruction sheet for that.
All right.
And then everything it takes to get your building permit. So I hope that answers some of your questions, Rod, about what it looks like to work with us. We would be committed to taking your ideas and your budget and your needs and turning it into the home that you guys are after for your dream home. I know you're talking about that being a place you'd like to retire in. So we work with folks like that all the time. That's my little bit of a commercial, but I did think it was important to point that out because we've got two clients who are actually going through that process with us right now, and that just gives it some more context for how we help people. And that's why we do these webinars. Just we think that a better educated client is a better client. So if people work with us, the more they know about the process, because we would see people who partner with us as being an involved member of the design team. We kind of design it that way on purpose. But Rod, I hope that answers some of your questions. We're coming up to the time I set aside, but did anybody else have a follow-up question or even just a piece of advice for Rod?
Hey, Rod, yes.
Go ahead.
Right.
Thanks, Vicky.
They're the best. They are the best. Their team is the best. I love them. So James is so easy to work with. He's just so easygoing and so perceptive, and he just knows right away. When I told him about my plan, we only talked once and he got it all. I mean, I don't know. That's my experience.
Okay.
And he just put everything in pictures for me. So I loved it. I hardly made any design. I just did some customization, but he got it the first time. So
yeah, I mean, all projects are different, so it depends.
But
how you want to load it. I mean, you guys were great because you just said, "Here's what we want to do," and you just gave me the freedom to do it, and then we came up with that, and you guys liked it, and that was lucky for all of us, I believe. Whereas some people like to design a lot of it themselves, and then get us to run with it from that point, or they bring floor plans from they might have purchased them online and stuff like that. So that's what makes a custom home, right? So there's a lot to it.
Yeah. So when actually I had this in mind when we hired an architect. I said, I want their touch, their signature on it, because I don't want to be the architect because I don't know how to be an architect. I will let him be the architect, and I just want what I want to put in my house. So with that in mind, I trusted him and his design, and it was wonderful. So.
Well, thank you, Vicky. That means a lot. We did not pay her to say that, Rod, but we appreciate that.
No. I expect
Logan,
a discount.
Oh yeah. Always asking for. That's how Vicky is.
Yes, we do
Just
together.
kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, Logan, have you guys had a good experience?
Yeah, it's been great. I was talking with Elise this morning, and I was like, man, we need to pay James to be our friend rather than our architect. That's what I was texting him. No, it's a really good team. They, you know, I kind of got good impressions from Jack when we first met him, and it's just, I think you can kind of tell when people are. I mean, I'm sure you've had your instances of working with subcontractors at times. You can just tell they're kind of sleazy, or they're like they have like ulterior motives or things like that, and you just don't get that. Like James has been super helpful, and I know Jack said that me and Elise are designing a house. I think Elise is designing the house. I'm
She's
more
doing
of
heavy lifting, yeah.
my wife is like loves the process. I think she's getting a little worn out at the moment, but not for anything that's on James or Jackson or anything like that. You know, it's been great, and I really like that the structural engineers are part of the package as well. You're going to need that. You're going to need that stamped anyway, and you don't want to build something that's going to fall down.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Logan. Thanks for the kind words. For Vicky and June, and for Logan and Elise, these are houses I'm expecting to be built next year in 2024. So we're expecting to be out there with cameras. I know, Vicky, you're probably like, I hope that happens.
Yes.
But we just kind of, we keep our eyes focused on the home getting built, and fortunately we've got a team behind that. So everybody
Yeah.
who's on our team is interested in that outcome. But yeah, we'll hopefully be celebrating real soon. But Rod, I hope you got a lot out of this, and I appreciate you making the time after we spoke today. If you'd like to follow up, schedule some time together, we can do that offline pretty easily, and schedule a call to get into a little bit more detail.
Okay.
But with that being said, unless somebody else has a big question, I think that's a good place to wrap up. But James, thanks for making the time early in your morning to go through some technical details about the permitting process.
Yeah, well,
And the Bantugs, thanks for joining us. Simpsons, thanks for joining us today. And
you.
Rod,
Thank
hopefully we'll
you.
get to talk to you guys again soon. Thanks for joining
Okay.
us, everybody.
All right, thanks.
All right. Thank
thanks,
you.
All right.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Nice. Bye,
Thanks.
guys.